about Timeline. I wanted to talk a little bit about the photo of Abby and Libby in the car, and if we can get to it, maybe a little bit about the psychological kind of profile. Again, some of these points are not well received points because my timeline does map kind of similarly onto the state's timeline. I think it's sort of disregarded because it's seen as proving guilt, but it isn't. So bear with me. I'm happy to talk it through and help explain it out so that you see that this isn't a timeline that is meant to make you believe Richard Allen is guilty. It's actually the opposite. So let's launch into the timeline because I think this is the most contentious issue in general in this case. Again, similar to the Hoosier Harvest Store footage, which sort of ties into the timeline, this was the piece of information that nearly sold me on Richard Allen's guilt and nearly made me walk away from this case. I think I watched Tom Webster's video of the timeline and, Gray Hughes' videos and, whatever people might say about certain YouTubers and their way of presenting information. I'm open to everybody. And even though I tended to not like the very negative guilt-based videos, I was willing to hear them out. And in doing so, I definitely did start to think, well, how is it possible that Rick Allen was there and not seen and didn't see anyone? I thought about, the earlier timeline might have been a better explanation, but then that didn't sort of measure up. And so I was kind of at this point where I was like, okay, maybe he is guilty, and maybe I have been hoping that he wasn't based on some sort of transference or something. I don't know. But I persisted and I decided to map out the trails. I looked at maps. I looked at other people's posts. I watched YouTube videos and drone videos to get a real sense of those trails because, of course, living across the other side of the world, I had no idea what those trails actually looked like and where each point was, and gosh, it was confusing, but I got my head around it over time by actually drawing on a piece of paper with colored pencils, drawing out the sort of the main trail routes, and then using some of the timeline information, the testimony, a lot of it from All Eyes' timeline on the website that she's made. That's a wonderful wealth of information. I popped all the times onto the map. I listened to Rick Allen's interrogation video, the first one. I'd say I'm probably at a count of at least 10 times now, and just kept mapping it out and trying to figure it out. There's no really polished way that I'm presenting this at the moment. It's still just my drawn out versions that I did whilst doing dinner time with my kids, so using their scrapbook paper and colored pens and pencils. So yeah, I'm not technical at all, so I'm not sure how to actually put that on the screen now, but I have posted it in my community posts. And again, if you go to the subreddit Delphi Mystery, you will be able to see the maps that I've drawn and the timeline that I've created. I want to try and stay on point here, so I will try not to ramble too much, but it is quite hard to talk it through in a really linear fashion because of the fact that there's so much information here to juggle. But let's go through it step by step. I'm going to pull it up on my screen, and I don't think it's going to show on this video, but if it does, wonderful. If it doesn't, then yeah, feel free to look at the other sources of this information. As I said, I'm not a tech savvy person. I used to be, but not anymore. Technology has raced ahead, and I'm not keeping up at the ripe old age of 42. So I may not be able to put it on the screen, but happy to talk it through based on the pictures I have on my screen, and then you can follow along by looking at the pictures that I've uploaded. So let's start with the timeline. And then if we have a chance, I'll go to the photo and the psych evidence, but I may actually do that in another live because I need to actually do some of my paid work today as well. Okay, so let's pull it up. Oh, I don't know how to get rid of the chat here. Sorry, guys. Okay. Nope, I'm doing something weird on my phone. Yep, here we go. All right, so let's go on to Reddit. And let's have a look. Bear with me, guys, I'm getting there. I'm just pulling up the timeline so that we can actually talk it through. Again, just the caveat that I know that many people do not like my timeline. They think that it doesn't match the fact, and they think that I'm agreeing with the prosecution. I'm certainly not. If you watch any of my videos or read any of my content, you'll see that I'm particularly now firmly on the side of Rick Allen being innocent. So let's have a look at, if you are able to see it, if you're not, if you look at my very roughly drawn picture of the trails, you'll see that on the left-hand side, we have the trailhead, which is the official trailhead. That has an offshoot. I'll do it as clock times. So if you are not able to visualize it right now, look at it right now, you can visualize it. So we've got the trailhead, and at about the 11 o'clock, we've got the old CPS building, the little gravel trail that's about 5 minutes, I believe, walk. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because clearly I've never been there, and I'd love to go there, but it's far away. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong with any of my timings or distances or locations. So we've got the old CPS building at about 11 o'clock from the trailhead, a 5-minute walk, a gravel path that runs sort of alongside the road, the 300 North. We've got the Freedom Bridge that runs about 6 o'clock. And that goes back towards Delphi town. We've got at 3 o'clock the trail heading towards the trail split. That's about 5 to 8 minutes, I believe, between the trailhead and the trail split. And then at the trail split, we've got at 12 o'clock the Mears Farm entrance, or the farmer's entrance, which is, I think, just a minute or two's walk. And then we've got the 501 that is at 3 o'clock from the trail split heading towards the Monon High Bridge. That's about 7 to 10 minutes. And then we've got at about 4 o'clock the 505, which is about a 20 to 30 minute round trip, and that goes down to the creek bed. At the top of the 505, just off the trail split, is the memorial bench. So that's the map of the trails. Now, as far as I'm aware, those are the walked paths of these trails. There aren't any other pathways off that main part there. So you can see that there's areas of overlap here, which is why it's hard to have multiple groups of people on this trail not seeing each other. It wouldn't be hard if there were a lot of people on the trails that day, because I think of myself going to a local park. I would not remember everybody I walked past if it was a busy day. But I guess I've heard mixed information about this. You know, we've got the witness statements, and if we go by that, there weren't that many people on the trails in that time frame. But if we go by some of the other information I've seen, you know, on Reddit and in other YouTube channels, there may have been more people during that time. I'm just not sure why those people then haven't been interviewed, and why we don't have much information about what they did or didn't see. So I'm going to go based on the 3 known groups of people that were there between the times of... Sorry, my cats are trying to steal cat treats in the background. I may have to intervene because the dogs got involved. So what we know is between 12 and 2:15, we've got Betsy Blair on the trails with that short break to go to the bathroom. We know that we've got Bree Wilbur and the 3 other girls on the trails between 12:44 when they took the picture. Oh no, not 12:44, 12:25 when they took the picture at Freedom Bridge, 12:44 when they took the picture at Monon High Bridge, 1:26 when they took the picture at the bench, and about 1:45-ish when they were seen walking on the overpass. So we've got those 2 main, not groups because Betsy's not a group, but those 2 main kind of, I'm just going to call them groups because I don't know another word. So we've got them, and then we've also then got Abby and Libby that arrive at about 1:45-ish. And then we've got Rick Allen. And I'm not going to say his time frame just yet because I know this is a contentious point, but let's just say he's on the trails at some time between 12 and 2. So now I'm going to go to the second part of my visuals, which, my amateur visuals, of course, which is the 3 columns that you'll see written in my handwriting. Luckily, my handwriting's fairly readable. And you'll see here where I've mapped out Betsy Blair and the 4 girls and what they were doing on the trails that day. So let's start with Betsy Blair. We've got... Thanks, guys, for watching and the thumbs up. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Feel free to chime in if there's anything that I'm getting wrong here. So we got Betsy Blair. So we know from the Hoosier Harvest Store camera that, and also from her Fitbit data, that she would park around 12:03 at the Mears Farm entrance, and she heads to the Monon High Bridge. So she goes straight from the Mears Farm to the trail split and to the Monon High Bridge, which would mean she'd arrive at the High Bridge about 12:10. She then turns around, heads back to the trail split, so that would be about 12:17, and then she goes down the 505 trail, which would be approximately 12:17 to 12:47. So that's accounting for about half an hour. I mean, this can all be give or take because we don't know if she went all the way down the 505 and we don't know her walking speed. But bearing all of that in mind, she would be back up at the trailhead by about 12:55. She would be at the trail split again by 1 o'clock. She would walk to the Monon High Bridge again by 1:07. And then it appears that she leaves the Mears entrance at about 1:15 to go to her toilet break. So that kind of is her between 12 and 1. Now, if we know that the girls are also, the 4 girls, are also on the bridge between 12:25 and 1:30-ish, not the bridge, the trails, then we have to account for how they don't seem to see each other, because Betsy Blair only mentioned seeing the 4 girls on the overpass as she's driving back from her toilet break at 1:46. So she clearly, well, not clearly, but it doesn't seem that she sees the 4 girls as they're on the trails, because it doesn't seem like she mentions they're the 4 girls that I saw earlier. The 4 girls don't seem to mention Betsy Blair. Again, could they have missed a woman walking on her own? Sure, they may have. But the fact that neither of them saw each other walking on the trails suggests that they possibly didn't actually cross paths. So particularly as there weren't any other people really on the trails at that time. So let's look at the girls' timeline. This is mapped from their photographs. So we've got the Freedom Bridge photograph at about 12:25. So we're just going to approximate that that's when they're at the trailhead. So they would get to the trail split by about 12:35, and they would get to the Monon High Bridge by about 12:44. Now, how have they missed Betsy Blair, who's on the trails at that time? Well, Betsy Blair is on the 505 trail, which is obscured between 12:17 and 12:47. Now, again, my times are not exact, so please don't quote me on the times, but that sort of accounts for how they could have walked past the trail split and to the Monon High Bridge without seeing Betsy Blair. And it also accounts for Betsy Blair then leaving the 505 while the girls are probably still on the Monon High Bridge. So the girls then go down the 505 trail. And again, just looking at the time roughly, we would expect that might have been by about 12:55. So Betsy Blair is now at the trailhead, about to head back to the Monon High Bridge. The girls have gone down the 505 trail, and they're down there for about 20 to 30 minutes as well. And they head back to the bench, which is near the trailhead at about 1:26. And it's after this that they see Bridge Guy. And then they head off onto the Freedom Bridge and over the overpass about 1:44-ish, and they're gone. So you can see how Betsy Blair and the girls would not have seen each other because each group were on the 505 when the other group or the other person walked past. So that explains straight away how 5 people were all on the trails, 4 together and 1 separate, between the times of 12:25 and 1:15 and didn't see each other. So now this is where it gets tricky. How do we add Rick Allen into this picture without him being bridge guy that is seen at 1:30ish around the trailhead, and then maybe seen on the Monon High Bridge around 1:50ish, according to Betsy Blair? Well, we could try the earlier time frame, like Rick suggested in his interrogation video, but that makes it incredibly hard because it requires him to be on the main trails between the times of 12 and 1, and not see Betsy Blair and the 4 girls. Now that, and then not see him. And that's pretty much near impossible because somebody's on the 505, somebody's on the main trail. They all say that they went to the Monon High Bridge. They all passed the trail split. So it just didn't work out. I wanted it to because I wanted that to be the quickest way for us to say Rick Allen is not guilty. The tip from Dan Doolan or the interview from Dan Doolan has the wrong time. He was cleared based on his timeline. But I just couldn't reconcile it. So instead, I thought, is there a time frame that Rick Allen could be on the bridge and on the trails without being seen, but also not being bridge guy? And I think that I figured it out. It is very tight. Don't get me wrong. I know that the people who think Rick is guilty are going to say you're really stretching it and you're overreaching here. But we've also got to remember that unlucky timeframes exist in this case. Abby and Libby arrived at the wrong time, because if they had arrived a few minutes earlier, a few minutes later, who knows who else would have been on the bridge who could have intervened. And that's incredibly sad, because if they'd arrived a little bit earlier, they may have met up with the 4 girls. Betsy Blair may have seen them and intervened. If they'd arrived a little bit later, some of the next group of people who seemed to arrive on the trails at about 2 o'clock could have helped, but they arrived at the exact time frame where they were isolated with the perpetrator or perpetrators on that bridge. So let's not pretend that unlucky timelines do not exist, because they do in this case. So let's look at the timeline that I suggested for Rick, and this timeline exonerates him, guys. So yes, it does match some of what the prosecution might say, but bear with me. So initially when Rick Allen went to the police station with Kathy, I believe that was on the 16th. The 16th of February. The initial, I think, Orion tip or whatever it is, I may be wrong there. I probably shouldn't try to use technical things that I don't know about, but I believe it said 1 to 3 was the time he said he was on the trails. We know that then the interview with Dan Doolan, which again could have a little bit of fiction in it, it says 1:30 to 3:30, right? But if we do assume maybe the 1 to 3 time frame was a little bit more in line with what happened, and also bear in mind, guys, when Rick is talking in that interrogation video, he does say around 12-ish, but he says could have been before noon, could have been afternoon, and then he says at one point 1 o'clock, 1:15, 1:45 or something like that. Haven't got the direct quote here. It is in the subreddit if you're interested, but he does actually quote various times. He doesn't know which time it was, and I don't blame him, because if you ask me what time I took my dog on a walk yesterday, I would say I think it was before I picked my kids up from school, and I picked my kids up from school from after school care. So I think it would have been about 3 o'clock. But I don't know for sure, right? And that was just yesterday, let alone 6 years ago. So I think that Rick Allen most likely parks around 1 o'clock. Another contentious issue, I do wonder if he parks at the old CPS building, and again, bear with me. It actually doesn't matter if he parked there or at Old Camden Road, which I do believe is what others have suggested a pretty good conclusion based on what Rick Allen says. It doesn't actually really matter. The time frames would stay relatively similar. We just have to add a few minutes from between parking and trailhead. But the reason I think that he parked at the old CPS building is because of the car sightings. So there seem to be 2 cars sighted in that area. The old looking car that Betsy Blair and is it Brad Heath? Why does everybody have similar names in this case? I think they both saw the old looking car. But Betsy Blair also says she saw the car backed into the old CPS lot, which is not the old-looking car, according to Brad Heath, who saw it twice. He said that it was parked some way up from the old CPS, not closer, but between the old CPS and the Mears Farm entrance. So it was a little bit further up the road, but it was parked weirdly, but it was not parked at the old CPS. But Betsy Blair sees an old car, but also thinks that she sees a car backed into the old CPS. What are the chances that she's blurred the two together? Not because she's trying to be deceptive, but because that's what our memory does. It amalgamates information. The reason I say this is because we've got the UPS driver, and I believe is there one other person as well who says they see a car parked at the old CPS? I believe there might be. And those time frames, I've written them down somewhere. I can't remember them off the top of my head. Again, indicate that there could have been a car at the old CPS as well. That could be Rick Allen's car that was there between 1 and 2 and then left, according to the timeline that I'm about to spell out. So, if he did park at the old CPS, in the interrogation, he does mention it. Yes, I'm not going to lie, Mullins and Liggett really try to push him towards it. However, at one point, he himself says you go under the overpass, you loop around to the other side. It had a gravel trail, used to walk across along the road until they put the gravel trail because you couldn't park at the trailhead. But this was the only way to access the trails from that side once they told you couldn't park at the Mears entrance. So I've got lots of his quotes from that video that support that there is a point at which he does mention that he could have parked at the old CPS. Now, the majority of the interrogation video, I do agree with others, as they pointed out to me, and I've certainly changed my view from that he is talking about the parking area near the Little Bridge, which I believe is the old Camden Road parking area. Amazing how much I know about this town that I've never visited. But anyway, I'm sure that's all of us in this case. So if he parks at about 1 o'clock at the old CPS or on Old Camden Road, and he's at the trailhead at about 1:05, you would see that at the trailhead there would be nobody else there at that point. We would know that Betsy Blair has long gone from the trailhead. She's over towards the Monon High Bridge, and the girls, the 4 girls, are down the 505 trail. So he could easily arrive there and not see anybody. He then might head towards the trail. Well, he would head towards the trail split because from his account, he talks about walking down to the bridge and then back to the bench on the 505 and then back and out. He doesn't mention the Freedom Bridge. That's the other reason I don't feel he parked at Old Camden, because he doesn't seem to mention walking across the Freedom Bridge, which, again, it could just be a slip of his memory. I'm not saying that his memory would be perfect for that either. But I think our memory for the route we took is usually better than our timing, for example, or where we parked. It just is more of a narrative that we remember in our head. And it's just interesting because he does give a lot of detail. He really searches his memory. He's quite verbose in that video, which again suggests him trying to be incredibly conscientious and figure out exactly what happened. And, he's really trying his best to remember. And he just doesn't mention walking across that. Nor does he mention walking across the little bridge that he mentions parking near. So let's say he walks to the trail split, which is, I think, also what he refers to as the trailhead at times too. I know other people have referred to it as a trailhead number 2, I believe some people call it. So that is where the 501, 505 Mears entrance fork is. So if he arrived there at about 1:16, he would have missed Betsy Blair. She's already got in her car and gone. And the 4 girls would have been on the 505. He mentions that he passes some girls at the trailhead, leaving the trails. He presumes walking back to where the cars are parked. Now, when he says the cars are parked, the only cars he mentions at any point are the cars that are parked at the Mears entrance. So, I don't know. I mean, to me, I think that then suggests that he's passing them around that trail split, because otherwise, where else is he passing them? Because he's walking in the direction of the Mears car park at the trailhead. So, I mean, not the Mears car park, but he's walking in the direction towards the trail split. If he sees people at the trailhead, then they would be headed towards Freedom Bridge. And he doesn't mention any cars parked at Freedom Bridge or in the area that he parked at. So my sense here, if you look at the geography of that, if anyone looks at any of the YouTube videos that show the 505 trail, you will see that it runs sort of parallel and to an angle off from the 501. And so you could be walking down the 501 around the trail split, and you could see people coming up the 505, and they may not see you because there are trees, and also the girls are probably busy talking. They're 4 teenage girls chatting and having fun, and he's a quiet, small, meek man walking down the trail in probably quite camouflaged clothing, right? So, and I don't mean he's camouflaged because he's guilty. I just mean men just wear pretty bland clothes, right? So, oh, that was a bit sexist. You know what I mean, though. From the clothes he's described, they're quite bland. So why does he only see 3 girls? Well, if you're walking up the 505, you're not going to necessarily see all 4. You could see 3 of the 4 girls. Maybe another one's lagging behind. Maybe she's behind one of the others. I don't know. And I know people will say, well, I'm cherry picking here and I'm trying to fit a narrative. Well, aren't we all doing that though? We're all trying to figure out how to piece it all together. And this is just one option. I may be wrong, but it made sense to me. So he could be walking towards Simone on High Bridge. He sees 3 of the 4 girls walking up. He sees them because they're chatting and they may be wearing brighter clothes. They don't see him. He walks over to the Monon High Bridge and he's there at about 1:25. He looks down for the fish, which can be seen, according to Lawyer Lee, and I trust her, and I've seen the video. And he stands there for a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, the 4 girls, as we know, have headed back towards the bench. And he then turns around and he heads back to the trail split, arriving there at about 1:35, and he sits on the bench at the top of the 505, the memorial bench. Now, that bench is a little bit off the trail split. If you watch it on video, you can see it, but there are trees around it, and on top of that, it faces out towards the water, which is exactly how he described it. So he's looking at a stock ticker that is in his in the interrogation video, and he's looking at his stock ticker on his phone, hunched over on that bench. He wouldn't be super visible, but more importantly, he wouldn't see somebody walking behind him, which is why I believe that Bridge Guy could easily have walked behind him after passing the girls at about 1:30. So Rick Allen's sitting on that bench. He's not noticing anything. He gets up at about 1:45-ish, and he does notice 2 cars in the Mears lot. He said there could have been people at one point near those cars. He doesn't look too carefully, and he heads off back to his car, which, wherever it's parked, maybe at the old CPS, he's back in his car by 2 o'clock, and he leaves. So you can see how that time frame allows Rick Allen not to be seen by anybody. It allows him to see 3 girls, and it allows him to also not see Bridge Guy. Bridge Guy may have seen him, who knows, but he didn't necessarily see Bridge Guy. He also wouldn't have seen the older car, just by the way, even if he parked at the old CPS, because that would have been a bit further up, so he may not have noticed it, which is why he doesn't describe any other cars parked where he parked. I think that his phone data does show that he was home or pinged somewhere not near the trails after about 2 o'clock, but definitely by 2:15. And again, this links in with the IMEI Mead info that I've raised before. I think that was what cleared him back in 2017. But now that has been misplaced, I'm going to guess, like a lot of other things in this case, there is nothing to prove that he was home earlier. What's really sad about this timeline is that Rick was literally leaving just before everything happened. And if he actually indeed had been on the bridge, I believe, like a lot of dads out there, he would have actually looked after those girls. He would have stopped what was happening. Now, I could be reaching here. I don't know Rick Allen, but from what I can see of Rick Allen, from what's publicly been available, from watching the interrogation videos, from knowing what I do about how fiercely protective he is of his wife, how close he is to his mum, and the fact that he has a female, child, himself, a daughter, I feel like he would have been the sort of person that would have intervened if he'd seen something happening. And so again, this is where we get to unlucky timelines. So I've done enough talking. I think I'll leave the other points for another video, but I've explained the timeline now. If you look at what I've posted in the community and on the Delphi Mystery subreddit, you'll see my scrawled out, unfortunately not super polished timeline and trail map, and I want you to really just go through it and look at the timings that I'm suggesting and see if they marry up. The times are somewhat based on the information on All Eyes Timeline in terms of the testimonies and the HH camera and those sorts of things. But yes, I have added my own times in there for Rick Allen and also for the various points on the trail. So have a look at it. If you can pick holes on it, I'm absolutely open to that. But I do believe that I've kind of plotted it multiple times. I've double checked it, triple checked it, and I do believe that it does make sense. I'm not saying that it's definitely correct because nobody knows that, and it is incredibly tight. It really is tight for Rick Allen to have been there whilst the four girls and Betsy Blair were there, and to not have seen them. But I think that this does account for it. So would love to hear your comments, but please don't comment without actually looking at it and actually like kind of working through it step by step. And please recognize that we're all kind of trying to pick out information and fit a narrative. That's what we're all doing, trying to piece this together. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the few people that did view and like the video. That's really nice and I really appreciate it. And if anyone else wants to collaborate with me, please reach out. I'm totally open to collaboration. Would love to not just be speaking to myself on these lives, but at the moment I don't have anyone else to speak to other than my cats and my dog about this case, and ChatGPT, which, yes, I do use ChatGPT to help me to figure things out, but ChatGPT couldn't figure out this timeline. It got it wrong every time, so this is all me. All right, bye guys.